today's True Crime Tutorial Tuesday video, I'm talking about Sabrina Kouider whilst doing my makeup, so keep on watching to hear about her crimes and see me create this makeup look. Sabrina Kouider was born in 1983 in Algeria and moved to France as a child. At 19, she was manning a crepe stand at a fun fair on the outskirts of Paris when she met 24-year-old Usim, known as Sam Medouni. Right away, he was entranced by her beauty and charm. He began pursuing her relentlessly and soon became wrapped around her little finger. Sabrina was manipulative and disloyal, cheating on Sam and regularly leaving him for other men. But she always returned to him, and he took her back, no questions asked. In 2005, at the age of 22, Sabrina left France for London for a job as an au pair. Sam, who was 27 at the point, got a job in London as a financial analyst at a French bank. Between Sam's job in finance and Sabrina going on to become a successful fashion designer and makeup artist, the pair did well for themselves. The flat they rented in South Fields was valued at £900,000. The couple had 2 children, although during my research I found very little information about them other than that they were boys and aged 8 and 4 at the time this case takes place. Neighbours referred to Sabrina and Sam as antisocial and odd. Sabrina always looked very glamorous and dressed well, they said, but the couple were not friendly and they were often inconsiderate of those living around them, leaving garbage sitting on the street outside their home for days, blocking neighbours' driveways with their cars and not paying rent to their landlord on time. Sophie Lynette was born on January the 7th, 1996 to Catherine Dandelion and Patrick Lynette in the town of Troyes in northeast France. It is not clear exactly when, but at some point Catherine and Patrick divorced and Catherine married Stephen Dandelion, Sophie's stepfather. Despite the divorce, Sophie remained close with both her parents. Sophie was beautiful with long, dark curls and greenish grey eyes and a kind, warm smile. She was quiet and gentle in nature, loved animals and dreamed of working with children. Growing up, Sophie enjoyed playing the guitar, reading and ice skating. Catherine, Sophie's mother, described her daughter as someone who hated suffering and injustice. She was passionate about preventing animal cruelty. Sophie was a selfless and generous person who was never particularly interested in material possessions. On finishing school, Sophie completed a vocational course in childcare. Shortly thereafter, she was offered a position as an au pair in London. Compared with Troyes, which has a population of approximately 62,000 and looks like a town out of a fairy tale, London is a completely different world. This was no small feat for Sophie, whose friends and family described as shy, reserved and naive, but Sophie viewed it as an adventure. Although she may have been a little apprehensive, it would be an excellent opportunity for her to spread her wings and get out of her comfort zone. It would also allow her to vastly improve her English. Furthermore, she'd be working with children and gaining experience for her future career. In January 2016, shortly after her 20th birthday, a nervous but excited Sophie moved to London. Never could she have known the horrors that awaited her. At first, Sophie's experience as an au pair for Sabrina and Sam was a positive one. The children adored her and she was in her element looking after them. She befriended other nannies working in the area, of which there were many. On phone calls with her mother, Catherine, Sophie seemed happy and pleased with the way things were going in the beginning. She got along with Sabrina, often chatting at the kitchen table over cups of tea. Sabrina, who loved doing hair and makeup, even gave Sophie a makeover at one point. However, the initial phase in which Sophie was content and at ease in her new job would not last. And it's difficult to tell exactly when things began to go downhill. Mark Walton, Sabrina's ex-boyfriend, had a hold on Sabrina that was so baffling and unfathomable, it's hard to believe it's not something out of a bad movie. Her obsession with this man truly embodies the phrase stranger than fiction. The band Boi-ing was formed in 1993 by Irish music manager Louis Walsh. Mark Walton was one of the founding members of Boi-ing, but was only in the band for about a year before being pushed out by other band members. The band would go on to become very successful in the UK, but not with Mark as a part of it. At the time this case takes place, Mark was living in LA and working in the music industry. According to Mark, he and Sabrina were in a relationship from 2011 to 2013. Some months after Sophie arrived in London and began working as an au pair for Sabrina and Sam, Sabrina began exhibiting severely delusional behaviour. Her delusions centred around an absurd obsession with the idea that her 21-year-old French au pair was colluding with Mark in an attempt to do her and her family harm. Sophie had never met Mark in her life. She would call him and accuse him of sexually abusing her cat, even though she did not have one, using black magic on her and hiring a helicopter to fly over her home and spy on her. Police received more than 30 reports from Sabrina about Mark, all of which turned out to be bogus. She was given a caution by police for creating a fake Facebook profile and using it to harass Mark, mainly accusing him of being a paedophile. Sabrina's accusations against Sophie, including her sleeping with Mark, being a paedophile, a spy, and helping Mark come into her home so that he could drug and sexually assault her, Sam, and the children. It is believed that Sabrina and Sam suffered from a very rare psychological disorder known as folie à deux, the literal translation being madness for two, or dual psychosis. Sabrina had previously been diagnosed with depression and borderline personality disorder. On top of these existing psychological disorders, she manipulated Sam into sharing her delusions. Sam was completely on board with everything Sabrina said or did, no matter how off the wall it was. In fact, he not only entertained her delusions, he fully embraced them. During a psychiatric assessment, Sam was not found to have any mental health issues, but fully believed in Sabrina's accusations against Mark. In the beginning, when Sabrina's violent behaviour towards Sophie was just starting out, Sam would leave the flat and go for a walk instead of joining in on the abuse. However, it was not long before he began participating, particularly after he became a part of Sabrina's ridiculous stories, specifying that Sophie was helping Mark come into their home so he could sexually assault him. Several members of the Southfields community recalled seeing Sophie out and about in the months leading up to her murder. However, being very shy and not speaking much English, she did not speak to people she didn't know well. One such person who later spoke to the press about Sophie was Michael Cromer, who owned a fish and chip restaurant in the area and had spoken to Sabrina and Sam about the possibility of going into business together. Sophie would sometimes join the couple at the Cromer's restaurant, but she barely spoke. She came in a few times on her own, clearly upset. Michael asked her what was wrong, and she told him that her mother was ill. Addressing the question of why didn't she just leave her employer's home, Ruth Baskwell, a chief prosecutor at the CPS, said that Sophie had written and spoken to her family about leaving. However, it seemed likely that the pair manipulated and gained control over her. In April 2017, about 15 months into her employment, Catherine noticed her daughter seemed unhappy and fed up when they spoke on the phone. She wanted to come home, Sophie told her. On the 8th of August 2017, Catherine recalled her daughter crying and sounding disorientated during a phone call. At that point, Sophie was being beaten, no longer being paid, and being interrogated regularly. Sabrina and Sam were not letting her eat, and she'd become extremely thin as a result. In the final 12 days before her murder, Sophie was not allowed to leave the flat on Wimbledon Park Road. On September the 20th, 2017, firefighters arrived at the residence of Sabrina and Sam after receiving calls from concerned neighbours about a foul-smelling bonfire in the back garden of their flat in Southfields, south-west London. Their neighbours were right to be worried. The bonfire was on the verge of burning out of control. Sam and Sabrina stood nearby cooking chicken on a barbecue. They appeared to be relaxed and unconcerned about the raging flames just feet away. Once firefighters had gotten the blaze under control, they made a grisly discovery. When they asked Sam what he was burning, he shrugged and calmly replied that it was the carcass of a sheep he had bought at Wimbledon Market. On the contrary, Thomas Hunt, one of the first firefighters to arrive at the scene, saw what he believed to be a human nose and fingers burning in the fire. When he began shifting through the ashes, he found blackened pieces of clothing and jewellery. "Bollocks," Thomas Hunt responded to Sam's blatant lie that he was only burning animal remains. It would turn out that Thomas Hunt's suspicions were correct. The remains on the bonfire were not those of a sheep at all, but rather those of Sophie Lynette. 2 days later, Sabrina and Sam were arrested on suspicion of murder. The trial of Sam and Sabrina for the murder of Sophie Lynette began in March 2019 at London's Old Bailey. The two admitted that they had tried to dispose of Sophie's body. However, when it came to who was responsible for her murder, they pointed the finger at each other, both refusing to take the blame. Prosecuting Sam and Sabrina was Richard Howell QC. He relayed to the jury the horrific abuse Sophie endured in the final months of her life at the hands of her employers, whose motives were punishment and revenge against Mark Walton. Sophie's parents and stepfather travelled to London to attend the trial. While searching Sabrina and Sam's home after Sophie's murder, investigators never found her passport or the plane ticket her mother had bought her. It was likely that the couple had destroyed them. They were easily able to break Sophie down with their vicious and relentless interrogations, which involved beatings and holding her head underwater in the bathtub. Eventually, they forced Sophie to confirm Sabrina's deranged accusations were true, that she was conspiring to help Mark Walton come to their home so that he could drug them and sexually assault them. They threatened her with rape, violence and prison if she did not confess. A video taken on September the 18th, 2017 of Sophie confessing was shown to the jury. In it, she is emaciated and looks completely broken. Shortly after this video was taken, Sophie was dead. These interrogations were recorded on the phones of Sabrina and Sam. More than 8 hours of recordings were uncovered. In one of the recordings from September the 11th, 9 days before the murder, Sabrina was heard screaming at Sophie, "You destroy everything. I was trying to find myself again. I pray to God not to make me touch you. I don't want to make my hands dirty." Before her body was thrown onto the fire, Sophie suffered significant violence at the hands of her employers, the prosecution told the jury. Her injuries included a fractured jawbone and sternum and 5 broken ribs. They planned to tell a story about how Sophie had left their employment out of the blue and returned to France. The gender and age of the body was not clear at first, given how badly burned it was. A Home Office pathologist said at trial, the body was not even confirmed to be that of Sophie's until 2 weeks later, on October the 3rd, when the DNA tests came back. Her ultimate cause of death was never determined. The 3 most likely causes were a blow to the head, strangulation, or drowning. Mark Walton flew from LA to London to testify against Sabrina. He paid for several nannies, but she would always fire them, paranoid that they were stealing from her and flirting with him. The first time he'd ever heard of Sophie was September the 21st, when police in London contacted him the day after the murder, Mark told the court. The prosecution was successful in convincing the jury of Sabrina and Sam's guilt. On May the 24th, 2018, after a trial that lasted 2 months, the pair were found guilty of murdering Sophie Leonette. On hearing the verdict, Sabrina burst into tears. Sam stared into his lap, motionless. While Judge Nicholas Hillard alleged that the couple were severely delusional, suffering from folie à deux, as I mentioned earlier, particularly Sabrina, who was the driving force, this was not a defence for their heinous treatment and eventual murder of Sophie. Sabrina and Sam were both sentenced to life in prison to serve a minimum of 30 years. No one, no God, will ever forgive you both for what you have done to my daughter. You are equally as evil as one another, Catherine said. A celebration of Sophie's life, attended by over 150 people, was held in France on the 6th of June 2018. Patrick Lynette, Sophie's father, said of his daughter, "Sophie was so nurturing, she liked children and animals. She could not stand seeing others suffering, and it breaks my heart to know that she was abused to the end of her life." So this is everything I have for today's case, everything on today's video. I hope you guys have all enjoyed, and I will see you all in the next one.